Conversations with Cait, a podcast centered on the arts, culture, and race and gender politics. For today's topic, we will be discussing Islamophobia. In November, a video surfaced of Republican Representative Boebert of Colorado making anti-Muslim remarks about Democratic Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota at a conservative party in September. She referred to Omar as a member of the Jihad Squad and said that she felt safe since Omar didn't have a backpack with her, referring to her as a suicide bomber. In mid-December, the House approved the Combating International Islamophobia Act, which addresses the rise in incidents of Islamophobia. It will help policymakers better understand the interconnected global problems of anti-Muslim bigotry, and it will also establish a comprehensive strategy for establishing U.S. leadership in combating Islamophobia worldwide. It has yet to be approved by the Senate before heading to President Biden's desk to be signed into law. For today's guest speakers, I have Harvard professor Dr. Ali Asani and Buffalo State student Amnah Mohsin to share with us their thoughts on this bill. Dr. Assani is Marie A. Albertson Professor of Middle Eastern Studies and Professor of Indo-Muslim and Islamic Religion and Cultures. He has been particularly active post-September 11 in improving the understanding of Islam and its role in Muslim societies by conducting workshops for high school and college educators. He will share with us what we can do at the education level to help stop this anti-Muslim bigotry and discuss more about how we can improve intercultural and race relations. Amnah Mohsin, a junior at Buffalo State, will also share her thoughts on Boebert's comments and what this bill means to her as a Muslim American. Hi, Amnah. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Hi. Thanks for having me.
I can't complain. It's the holiday season, but I am a little bit politically frustrated with what's going on today. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
All right. Well, as you already said, my name is Amnah. I was born and raised in Buffalo, New York. I'm the daughter of immigrant parents from Yemen. They've been living here for over 22 years now.
And what was your reaction when you heard the news about Representative Boebert's anti-Muslim comments?
When I first listened to it, I was kind of taken aback. I mean, for Boebert to just assume Omar was like a suicide bomber makes me think if she really is suitable to be a congressman. I mean, her comment was kind of rigid, so you have to be narrow-minded to say something like that in front of a crowd. And for her to be speaking in front of a crowd, which, there will be someone recording your every move, is just, I think it's just childish for her to say something like that.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. It was confirmed that Boebert and Omar did have a phone call after the video surfaced, although it didn't end well. Boebert also took to Twitter saying that she apologizes to anyone in the Muslim community that she offended. What are your thoughts on this? Is apologizing really just enough?
I don't think apologizing is enough because, she said what she said. You can't take it back. And for her to apologize through Twitter seems half-hearted to me. Anyone could type sorry and, post it, online. And, maybe the least she could do was, probably post a video apologizing and, letting her emotions show. I'm kind of bashing her, but it kind of got me going when I first saw her comments.
Do you think this bill, the Combating International Islamophobia Act, is enough to stop anti-Muslim bigotry?
I don't think so. There's always going to be racism in America. There's always going to be that one person, ruining it for the other person. I couldn't say this is going to stop. Racism existed in the U.S. for centuries. We see it manifested out in the streets and on social media. We see people taking part in other forms, such as cultural appropriation. We always, like, we see it constantly in the U.S. education system, the wealth gap. We see it in the police violence. We, witness these things in person. There's just so much inequality. I mean, it's hard to fathom. It's coming to a point where change is long overdue.
Absolutely. What more do you want to see from our political representatives, like including accountability for their words and actions, especially from the Republican Party, who it tends to come from?
Maybe give them a little break will maybe help them, because I saw what happened with the other representative from, I forgot what state, but she said something about her last name is Green. So maybe giving them more time to think about what they've done, and not let them work for a little while, just to make them understand what they've done and what they've said, or let them see what their actions have brought upon some people.
During the floor debate of this bill, Republican Representative Scott Perry not only accused Omar of having ties to terrorist organizations, but he addressed his concern of the lack of definition of Islamophobia and argues that it's a gray area and so vague where it opens up the door for the definition of the term to be made up based on individual political proclivities. So it appears that Representative Scott Perry is asking for a definition. How do you define Islamophobia?
Coming from a Islamic background, I feel like Islamophobia is prejudice against the stereotypical, quote unquote Muslim characteristics, such as, names, skin color. You could go by clothing, including religious attire, headscarves, beards, people in general, people who look Middle Eastern.
And Amna, we talked about this before. As people of color, we both shared with each other our stories of our encounters with racism. Can you share, listeners, when you first encountered an Islamophobic attack?
I remember the first time I ever had someone say something to me about, my race is when I think I was about 9 years old. I was on the bus, and it was a group full of kids. I mean, the bus was filled with kids, and so they were just bickering about who likes who and whatever. And I said my comment, and then the kid behind me, he turns around, looks at me, and he says, "Go back to your country." And I, just sat down quietly and I was silent the whole entire ride.
And I recall from our discussion, you also mentioned you witnessed an anti-Muslim remark from a teacher to a student. Can you tell our listeners more about that?
Yeah, I was in middle school at the time. And I remember me and my friend, we went up to this teacher asking for help. And then I think we said his name a few times. And he got up, turned around, and he said, "What, Osama bin Laden?" And I just looked at him. Then I looked at my friend. My friend was about, I don't know, she had this look in her eye. She was about to pounce on the guy. But then I tried playing it cool and, laughing it off so it wouldn't be a big problem. I don't know, she on the other hand, she was, her blood was boiling. But then I had to, I tried to be like the one that sells peace among them.
What grade was this? Did this teacher teach?
It was 8th grade.
Based on your story about that kid who said, "Go back to your country," which is one that a lot of, people who quote unquote supposedly don't look American or as the stereotypical Caucasian American, there's this new trend in the GOP where it's called the replacement theory, which is the fear of people who are coming from other countries into America that they will replace the white race or that the white race is in danger. What's your response to that?
Wait, so you're saying that who's afraid of who?
So, the Republican Party's new scare term is the replacement theory. And basically, the replacement theory is the fear of people from other countries. The fear of immigrants coming into the United States will be replacing white Americans, like the white race is in danger. What are your thoughts on that?
That's kind of, can I cuss? This is, I don't know. Are these people that, are the immigrants, do they look Caucasian, or the certain race that they're going for?
This was mostly like during the Trump administration, especially with like Latinos or even people from the Middle East coming in. Like they use the term like, oh, America's in danger, or like you're being replaced by, or it's kind of like the fear of them taking like white jobs.
I feel like immigrants get the job done. For the people who are born in, I was born and raised here, but people who are like racially motivated, feel like they just have to move on, for immigrants to be taking their. Are you talking about jobs? Is that what you're talking?
Yeah, like it's just the fear in general that the white race is being threatened by immigrants, which is ridiculous.
That's some BS.
Absolutely. Okay, so the first anti-Muslim remark that I witnessed right in front of me was when I was in high school. There was a classmate who is Muslim, and this boy said to her, "Your parents are ISIS," and she kind of just laughed it off and said, "What? My parents are against those people." I didn't say anything, and it was one of those things where you kind of just walk into the classroom and you don't know what to say because you're caught off guard. And it's probably like the same like how you reacted, like like with your 8th grade teacher.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to someone who is not racially profiled but witnesses an Islamophobic attack, or any person being racially profiled right in front of them?
I probably wouldn't say anything to them in the moment. I'd stare at them, but then take them. I'd probably pull them aside and tell them, "Hey, did you see what happened? That was pretty wrong. You should have said something." Call them out. I feel like they, even still, when I'm like when the person being belittled by the other, let's say bully, they should know when to speak up. They should know when something is not in order. Obviously I would probably try to defend the person being attacked, but they should, take a step. It should be like a quick like a quick response.
It's called bystander apathy, and it's this thing where it's like, why don't people respond?
They're probably just too scared to get the backlash from other people. Like they don't want to get bullied, just like the other person being bullied. I feel like that's the ultimate, the main reason why they're not saying anything.
And I wanted to ask, was your teacher ever reported, the one who made the comment?
No, we just kept it under the rug. We swept it, like they say, sweep it under the rug, but we didn't say anything. We didn't want to make a big scene or anything.
Was it a public or a private school, if you mind me asking?
It's a public school. We were in a room, we were asking for help, so it was just the two of us and then the teacher.
Some solutions that I came up with to combat bigotry is having more lead representations of Muslim characters and play regular roles on television shows and movies. And what I mean by this is not playing just the bad guys like how Hollywood usually portrays them. And another solution that I had was having more literature with representations of Muslim women and Muslim men, because if people would just read as much as they engage with entertainment, it would help people understand and not automatically assume things. What are some other solutions that you think can help in countering these stereotypes?
I would say try and implementing educational courses about all different types of cultures in grade school. Teach kids how to appreciate and respect each other's cultures, because you never know what their parents are teaching them at home. And this may be brought upon adults too. You have when you're put into a field of work where there's a variety of races working together, you want to teach workers how to be respectful towards each other. So I think teaching them young.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. You won't believe this, but like I used to work at a daycare, and I was teaching the kids about diversity. And when they were asking me what my art lesson is of the day, I said, "Oh, I'm teaching the kids about diversity. That's gonna be the lesson the whole week."
Mm-hmm.
And the manager of the daycare said, "Oh no, that's too complicated for them to learn." I'm like, you start young. In my mind, I was thinking, no, it's not. You start young, it's good. And this was even like before the whole, like, you know, the whole Republican scare of like critical race theory debate and everything like that. But I just can't believe, like, do you think diversity like, what age do you think, like, we should start
No,
teaching kids?
not at all. I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm here for it. I mean, I have a niece. She's barely 2 years old, and we've got her. She has a variety of dolls from like every race, and we try to teach her how to respect every cult, like every culture, every race, and try to like teach her like how to be respectful of of one another. And I feel like there shouldn't be an age where diversity should be taught at any age. That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely. And it's even like those little steps, whether it be like purchasing toy decisions for your children,
Uh-huh.
like exposing them to like dolls of like people of different color and different ethnic backgrounds. So I think that's great. Amna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Again, thank you for having me.
You're listening to Conversations with Cait, a podcast centered on the arts, culture, and race and gender politics. Be a part of the conversation. What are your thoughts on this Combating International Islamophobia Act? You can also follow me on Instagram at Kate_Malilay_writes. That's CAIT_MALILAY_writes for updates on articles and future episodes. Stay tuned for our next guest speaker, Harvard professor Dr. Ali Asani. Good afternoon, Dr. Asani. Thank you so much for joining us today via Zoom. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
What was your reaction when you heard the news about Representative Lauren Boebert's anti-Muslim comments against Representative Ilhan Omar?
Well, on the one hand, I was not surprised because of all the anti-Muslim rhetoric that has been taking place in the country for several years now. So, when I heard those comments, I thought, yeah, it's still this Islamophobia surfacing yet again, and again being exploited by a politician. But what surprised me was that this was actually a member of Congress talking about a fellow member of Congress. And I was thinking that if such divides are right there in the heart of Congress, the heart of democracy, it really surprised me that this kind of rhetoric, should be present in the very chambers that make laws and, govern the country.
And do you think that this bill, the Combating International Islamophobia Act, is enough to stop anti-Muslim bigotry?
No, I don't think that it is enough, but I think that it is very important because it is essential to name a problem. If the problem remains unnamed and unidentified, people, officially, legally speaking, then people get away with all kinds of things by saying things. So, for instance, I don't know I haven't read the whole act itself, but when you have the legislature passes a law against Islamophobia, that is a definite step to identifying a problem that had remained unidentified, and because it was legally unidentified, people couldn't do anything about it in terms of the law. But now I think that since it's been identified as a legal issue, I think that it's a first step in a long process, I think.
During the floor debate of this bill, Representative Scott Perry of Pennsylvania not only accused Omar of having ties to terrorist organizations, but he addressed a concern of the lack of definition of Islamophobia and argues that it's a gray area and so vague where it opens up the door for the definition of the term to be made up based on individuals' political proclivities. How do you define Islamophobia?
I would say that Islamophobia is basically just a fear of Islam and of Muslims.
And I find that his argument that it's so vague and it's a gray area, I find it just weak because it shouldn't even have to be explained, the definition. Like he's saying like it would be based off of somebody's political view of how you define it. Like it's like it shouldn't have to be defined.
You know, I think actually Scott Perry is looking for a way to, sidetrack the conversation by saying, well, we can't define Islamophobia. Well, he hasn't actually studied it. There are people who studied it and they know what it is. To say that it lacks definition is, I think, in itself a problem. Because on what basis, as I say, it lacks definition?
Absolutely. And what else, in addition to this bill, do you want to see from our legislators?
Well, what I would like to see from our legislators is the need, to talk about, it's one thing to talk about, Islamophobia internationally, but what are we doing about Islamophobia domestically? Because we know that it is rampant in this country, and it is an effective way in which, Muslims are dehumanized, and it has led to, violation of civil rights, but also has led to all kinds of suspicions of anyone who's Muslim, spying on Muslims, all kinds of things. So there are going to be, it would be good for legislators to be able to talk about, just as we talk about how are we going to combat racism, we need to talk about how are we going to combat Islamophobia domestically.
Asani, you were particularly active post September 11 in improving the understanding of Islam and its role in Muslim societies, where you conducted workshops for high school and college educators, and you spoke at various public forums. Can you tell us more about that, and what can we do at the high school level and post-secondary education level to help combat anti-Muslim bigotry?
Yes, I was in conducting this workshop. I was trying to promote a way of thinking about religion that combats what I think, what I would call is religious illiteracy. One of the reasons why religions often get like Islam or Judaism, or it could be even Buddhism, I don't know, you can name many religions depending on the part of the world that you're in, that are used as a way of discriminating against believers, is there's a fundamental illiteracy about the nature of religion, and it's global. It's certainly true in the United States, but it's also globally true. And it is this illiteracy about religion. People don't have the tools to understand religion. It is not part of our educational system. I'm not talking about religion in a in a way that you're proselytizing a particular religion. I'm talking about really to think critically about what is religion and how are notions of religion constructed, using the tools of the social sciences and humanities. So what I tried to show in these workshops, taking what I call a cultural studies approach, which has been promoted by one of my colleagues here at Harvard Divinity School, Diane Moore, is that we have to think about religion as a very complex phenomenon that is embedded in very intricate ways in different contexts: social context, historical context, political context, economic context, but also artistic context and literary context and so on. In short, it's embedded in every dimension of human existence. And these contexts themselves, which are of course connected to each other, shape how an individual thinks about or interprets religion. So a person's political, social, economic background, for instance, plays a very important role in how they'll think about issues, about religion, for instance. And we know that religion itself is very often constructed in all these different contexts. So very often, if you change the political context or the economic context, you'll find interpretations of religion change. Let me give you an example. In the late 19th, early 20th century, in the American South, there were people reading the Bible to justify white supremacy. I'm talking about the Klan, and used the text itself and interpreted the text to dehumanize African Americans or anyone who was non-white. In that same geographic region, you had African Americans who were now beginning to fight for their civil rights and so on, reading the same Bible and seeing in the Bible the hope for freedom and salvation and liberation, sometimes even using the same verses from the Bible. So the question is, it's not whether the Bible itself promotes racism or violence or slavery or anything like that. It's how the Bible is read and who's reading it, and what is how does the context of that individual shape how they're reading the Bible. So religious literacy, tells us that we cannot make broad statements about any religion, whether it's Islam or Christianity and so on. We have to start asking questions such as, whose Christianity are we talking about? Whose Islam are we talking about? Who is interpreting it? What is the context in which they're interpreting? So that we can't make blanket statements about any religion. And more importantly, you can't start stereotyping an entire, the believers of an entire tradition and say, oh, you're all peaceful, oh, you're all racist, oh, you're all, all in favor of slavery and so on and so forth. What the cultural studies approach does, it helps us recognize that no religious tradition is monolithic. It helps us to recognize that there is tremendous diversity within every religious tradition. And if we want to understand a tradition, we need to understand these diverse viewpoints, that in every religion, you have a spectrum of interpretation. When people get that perspective of religion and they realize that, in fact, religious traditions are very complex, you can't simplify them, you can't make one single statement. And more importantly, they realized that religions don't have agency. Religions don't do or say anything. They're abstract ideas. Nobody has seen Mr. Islam or Miss Christianity or, these religions, do or say anything. They're ideas that people have in their heads, and they interpret those ideas, and then they act on those ideas. So it's people doing things in the name of religion, not religions doing anything by themselves. they can't because they're abstract objects. When people realize these things, it helps them be more critical about evaluating statements made about religion, whether it's Islam or any other religion, and believers of that tradition, because they realize that you can't make, broad statement like Islam is violent or all Muslims are terrorists. And so, because you know that it is not factually correct, and it's not engaging with the diversity within the tradition. When you start making statements that stereotype an entire people, what you end up doing is you dehumanize them. And once you dehumanize them, you strip them of their humanity, they become subhuman. And that single dimensional categorization of people then results in violence. And that is why I think we need to be, in our educational systems, be able to educate students, not only how to deal with diversity that surrounds them. The world is, that people are surrounded by different, but in particular, how do they understand religious difference? How do they understand different beliefs and perspectives? So that's what these workshops were, aimed at. In short, they were intended to humanize Muslims, that Muslims are just human beings like any other people on this earth. And that when you realize the humanity of the other, that dispels the fear and the hatred and the prejudice that ignorance creates.
What can we do as a society overall in improving intercultural and race relations?
Well, I think that there is, especially in the United States, we live in a society that is deeply polarized in many different ways. We're talking about the political is very obvious, but also economic, also in terms of issues of equity, health, so on. So there's immense polarization in our society, and that polarization very often means that we are not able to engage with people who are very different than ourselves. We tend to be in our little bubble. We have these deeply polarized societies where people cannot understand people who are different for themselves. And what we need to create are bridges, ways in which you can bridge those understandings, create better understanding. And sometimes I find that instead of focusing on the differences, which sometimes cannot be resolved, why not talk about the similarities and the commonalities? And so we understand, because human beings are, have many different aspects to them, to their identities. There is maybe the one identity that, is the subject of polarization, but we have many other identities. And maybe we can use the other identities which we share to try to create some bridges. I'm thinking about, for instance, you could be a Muslim and a Christian with very different religious views, very different religious perspectives, and so on and so forth. And, you would never agree on, just because of how religious doctrines are understood, you may never come to any agreement or consensus on a particular theological issue or a doctrinal issue. But you can come to agreement, for example, on the notion of social justice, helping the poor, helping the sick, helping the needy, because those are values that are common. So I would say that we need to use the common values that we have and then use those common values, the values that we share, to combat against fragmentation in society.
on the arts, culture, and race and gender politics. Be a part of the conversation. What are your thoughts on this Combating International Islamophobia Act? You can also follow me on Instagram at Cait_Malilay_rights. That's CAIT_MALILAY_rights for updates on articles and future episodes.
And I think I think there are certain common values that we share. For instance, as I mentioned, this idea of helping the poor, the sick, the needy, issues of social equity. These are things that all religious traditions preach. But very often we don't use them as ways in which we can collaborate with each other. They become a way in which we get to know each other by working together on certain issues that we agree on. We get to know people who are the other and realize, oh, they're just as human as we are. We may have our differences, we agree to disagree, but there are things that we share and we can do in common. And this way, I think you are able to build up the fabric of society. And I think it has to take place, I think, at a very micro level. It starts, I think, in neighborhoods. So if we start projects like this where people in neighborhoods, small neighborhoods, get to know each other, we, have meals, I don't know, have all kinds of activities, maybe activities that bring people together, working together in shelter or raising money for funding a particular project that is of community value and so on. When you collaborate on certain issues like that you have common interests in, you inevitably get to know the other much better.
What should someone do if they witness an Islamophobic attack?
Well, I think this is a very interesting question. It really depends on the context. There are, of course, all kinds of trainings that you can, that are available online for, bystander. I think there are resources available for that. I think on various websites, I've seen them. But basically, it means trying to intervene in a way that, of course, not if it endangers your life and so on, but ways in which you can intervene and divert the conversation. But it does take courage to do that. And I think it's not just courage, but also conviction that you're standing up for an injustice, an act of violence. I see it as Islamophobic. When you think about Islamophobia, it inflicts, of course, different types of violence. There's the personal, physical violence, but then there's also psychological violence against a person's psyche. And there's also, structural violence. But when you see somebody who is being attacked physically, of course, you're going to say, well, what are you doing? Like if somebody's going to be stabbed or something like that. And I think similarly, when somebody is being not just physically threatened, but also psychologically abused, speaking out is very, very important. I'm just going to give you just one example that I know of how bystander intervention really saved a Muslim student's life. This happened a couple of years ago, where a American Muslim who was wearing some form of the hijab, but not the traditional form of hijab. She was just wearing a headscarf that covered her hair, but it was loose fitting. And she was in a shopping mall, and she was going to her car. Her mother was still in the supermarket shopping, and she was going to a car. And this man just approached her, and he grabbed that scarf, and he wrapped it around her neck, and he tried to strangle her. And at that point, a lot of people showed up and said, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this? And, this girl's life was saved by all these strangers who witnessed what was happening and intervened. And I think, therefore, such kinds of acts, that we should not tolerate them, because if you tolerate them and do nothing, the silence itself makes you complicit.
And where did this attack take place?
I believe it was if I remember correctly, it was in Chicago. But there's, these attacks, I'm just giving you this as an example. There's so many attacks like this that happen. So many. And when my Muslim students tell me about, if it's not physical attacks, psychological things that people will say to them, nasty things. I've had students who've been walking across Harvard Yard and people shouting to go back home, Muslim women wearing a hijab, go back home. So you can find this anywhere. You can even find this in the classroom, in schools, in hospitals. You encounter it everywhere. I think if people want to be educated about the nature of religion and also of the nature of Islam and how to think about Islam, there is an online course that is offered through Harvard X. It's a course that I put together, and it's called Islam Through Its Scriptures. And while it's a course that looks at the Quran and the role and the different ways in which Muslims have interpreted and understood the Quran and the role that it plays in Muslim lives, it uses a particular approach about thinking about religion, this cultural studies approach, which people find very educational and really, gives them a better understanding on how to think about religion, how to be literate about the nature of religion. So this course, Islam Through Its Scriptures, is available through Harvard X. And as I said, it's totally free and anyone can access the course.
Dr. Asani, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful New Year.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Conversations with Cait, a podcast centered on the arts, culture, and race and gender politics. Be a part of the conversation. What are your thoughts on this Combating International Islamophobia Act? You can also follow me on Instagram at Cait_Malalay_rights. That's CAIT_MALILAY_rights for updates on articles and future episodes.